Was 2020 presidential hopeful Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York yesterday as she was making her pitch to progressive activists at the We the People annual summit here in D.C. The New York senator described to the audience what she is willing to do to keep President Trump from another 4 years in the White House.
I am willing to stand up to President Trump. I am the senator who voted the most against President Trump for his cabinet nominees. I am going to stand up to him every chance I get because that is who I am.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand joins me right now. I like what you said about courage. So President Obama, former President Obama, said the other day, candidates should focus on the issue they're willing to lose on, the one they care most about, that they're willing to take a loss on it. What's yours? What's your issue that's worth losing this election over?
I have several, but I think you have to address global climate change because it is the greatest urgent threat to humanity that exists. And I think Democrats who are afraid to dream big don't understand what leadership is. You have to be brave enough to say you have to do this now, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, just like John F. Kennedy. When he said he wanted to put a man on the moon, he didn't know if he could do it in 10 years, but he knew it would be an organizing principle of how great we are as a nation, how entrepreneurial, how innovative, how strong.
And he beat the spread.
And he did it. So we need a president who's going to say we must address global climate change and regain our leadership on the world stage and actually lead other countries to do the right thing. Why not a space race with China over green energy? Why not actually say, let's see who can address global climate change with clean energy and renewable fuels faster and see whose scientists and entrepreneurs are the best.
Most people now watching right now and listening say, okay, Ocasio-Cortez has got the Green New Deal. You're talking about the green part, but what about the rest of it, the ideological part of it, the left part of it? Are you happy with that?
So it's a lot more simple.
Because that's where Trump will run against.
But it's a lot more simple than people think. The Green New Deal is just a platform of ideas. Ideas, in fact, that we've been working on, that I've been working on for 10 years. It's clean air, clean water. I've been serving on the Environment Public Works Committee, making sure we can clean up poisoned water with PFOA for 10 years, from lead from PCBs. The second piece is infrastructure. There's no more bipartisan idea than rebuilding America's infrastructure. High-speed rail, rural broadband, new electric grid, more mass transit. And last is green jobs. And we know that if you train young kids in STEM and give them the opportunity to be able to be the next workers in wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, and biofuels, they're going to have the jobs of the future, and it's going to create economic growth. So that is the base of the bill. The thing that's aspirational is net zero carbon emissions in 10 years. And so just like putting a man on the moon, you don't know if you're going to accomplish it.
You sound like a real progressive, and I just wonder about your own evolution. So I'm going to talk about some other people later who've evolved. I think we all have evolved. But immigration, for example, used to be very big on more funding for ICE. Now you're basically for getting rid of it as it sits. Explain that evolution.
Yeah. So let's talk about border security first, and then I'll talk about evolution. Democrats are not afraid of border security. They are not afraid of keeping this country safe. And I will continue.
Why do we have 11 million people in this country illegally, either because they crossed the border illegally or they overstayed their visa? If we're doing a good job in this country of protecting our border, why do we have so many people who came into the country illegally?
Because, well, right now, because they're desperate. Because
no, 11 million.
Okay, but right now it's El Salvador, it's Guatemala, it's gang violence, it's civil war, it's hunger, it's fear. But traditionally, we are a country that has benefited from immigration. We are stronger because of our immigrant roots. We are stronger because immigrants have come to this country and helped build this country. It's the entrepreneurialism, it's the innovation. So for the 12 million people that are here, we need comprehensive immigration reform.
But should the Democrats be proud of the fact that they've helped enforce the border, or happy with the fact they like immigrants? Even if they're illegally here.
No, let me be clear. What President Trump has done is confuse the issue. There are two parts of immigration. There's the border security part, which is to fight against cross-border terrorism, human trafficking, gun trafficking, and drug trafficking. That's the part we will all fund. That is the part that we have to continue to make sure actually get the resources.
What about just poor Mexicans who want to move to the United States? Isn't that the biggest chunk of people?
I will address that. But the second half are people who want to come here because they're seeking asylum. That's where President Trump has gone off the rails. That's where he has been inhumane. And frankly, he's been frightened of immigrants and refugees. He's been a coward.
Okay, now to a very personal thing, because you were a colleague of Joe Biden. He was a senator, of course, and he's now recent vice president. He's under a lot of heat. I don't think a lot of heat. He's under heat.
Yeah.
What do you think of it? What should he do? Is there anything he can do now at this point in his career?
Well, you know, Chris, this is something I've taken very seriously over the last 7 or 8 years. I've been,
I know, with the women in the military
fighting
especially.
against sexual assault in the military, sexual assault on college campuses, and actually changing the rules for the House and Senate on harassment. So I think with these allegations specifically, I think it's something if Vice President Biden decides to run, he's just going to have to address directly with the American people. Because
what should he say?
These individuals feel demeaned, and that's not okay.
I've heard this. I think the speaker was fabulous on the other day. It's not what he thought, what he felt. Right. It's how people receive it.
Yes. And so I think there's a conversation happening in this country, and it is about, do we value women? And that when we allow this space for women to come forward, to tell their truth, to tell what they've experienced, you have to not only receive them and believe them so that you can then investigate. Okay. If you can't investigate, then justice.
You know what I'm trying to do here, get an answer on this very tough question. Is he a fit man to be the nominee for the Democratic Party? Is he fit for the office?
I think it's an issue that he's going to have to address directly with voters, and the voters will decide.
Okay, let me ask you about him and Franken, Al Franken, how they different, those cases. You were very, very strong in your decision, your belief that he shouldn't have served in the Senate any longer.
Well, they're very different. Senator Franken obviously had 8 credible allegations against him that were corroborated in real time. 2 of the
Was there more that didn't get out?
I am not at liberty to say that, but what I do know and what is public is that there were 8 credible allegations. 2 of them were since he was senator. And the last one happened to be a congressional staffer. Yeah. And so for me and many others, we just couldn't stay silent anymore. It's not that he didn't have the right to stay on and do his ethics investigation and sue every woman who came out against him. Those were all his decisions. My only decision was, do I stay silent or not? And as a mom of boys, Chris, Theo's 15, Henry is 10, and the conversations I was having at home weren't great. Theo was, Mom, why are you so tough on Al Franken? And I was almost apoplectic because I had to say, Theo, it is not okay ever to grope a woman anywhere in her body without her consent. It is not okay to forcibly kiss a woman ever without her consent.
Well, where are you on Biden then, given all that?
So we have 2 allegations. The fact that the first woman said that she felt demeaned, I think it's an issue that he's going to have to address with the voters.
Should he quit?
It's something he's going to have to talk about and understand what is happening.
But you're not, I want to end this because people are going to ask me, do you call on him to leave the race, not to enter it?
I do not. And what I'm saying now is that it's something he's going to have to address. Okay. And the truth is that we as a country have to decide whether we value women at all. Because, you know, today's Equal Pay Day. So it's the day actually in the year when a woman has to work all last year and up until today to earn the same as a white man doing the same job.
Equal pay. We
do we value women?
I think equal pay. If you're going to for that, you got something wrong with you. Anyway, thank you, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York.
Thank you.
One of the real candidates for President of the United States.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.